Hey, this is Brett, and you're watching Brett and Some Books. Please like and subscribe so you can check out more stuff that I read for people. And we are reading The Bosnia List by Keenan Trebenchevich and Susan Shapiro. Chapter 2, Pressure Cooker, Queens, New York, May 2011. So I hear you guys are taking your dad back to Bosnia this summer. My father's friend Isad said casually when I met him on the streets of Astoria. What? Who's taking him? I asked, surprised to hear, for the first time, that Dad had changed his mind and wanted to go visit the country that tried to annihilate us almost 2 decades before. I was pissed off. I guessed yet another of Dad's cronies had flown back to the Balkans and returned to say we should go too. So this was Dad's way of floating the idea secondhand. We'd vaguely fantasized about visiting at some point before we died, but it would be on my clock when I decided I could handle bumping into war criminals who'd tried to kill me walking down the street, now waving hello. I wasn't ready yet, and I didn't want to be pushed. No, we're not going. That's okay, Isad said. I'll take him then. No way was I letting my father return to our homeland without me and Eldon to protect him. That night in bed, I imagined what it would be like returning to my Birchkow home. There I'd see Petra, our Serb next-door neighbor who'd taunted us the entire year we were trying to escape, while her husband, Obrin, was working as a guard at Luka concentration camp. Petra was humiliated by my mother, demanding she hand over whatever clothes she had humiliated my mother, demanding that she hand over whatever clothes and furniture she felt entitled to steal. This time, I'd find the hag, drag her down the stairs out of our old building by her hair, and then throw her into a meat truck, the way the sadistic soldiers did to my people. I was startled by the intensity of my fury. At 30, I was an easygoing guy in a healing profession who hadn't had a revenge fantasy for 19 years. But just because the political scenario in Bosnia had slowly improved, and other Muslims we knew had trickled back to our home. Shit. We had trickled back to our town did not mean that I had to make the voyage. Now, a fleeting memory of my former apartment alone incited violent urges for revenge. I knew many survivors who felt this way. Sometimes, in the middle of breakfast, if the name of a turncoat from our town came up, even my gentle, mild-mannered father would mutter, I would have no problem putting a bullet in his head. The next day, I bumped into Dad and Eldon outside Black Bull, a Balkan grocery store here in Queens, 5 blocks from my place. It was owned by a couple from our hometown. So when exactly did you decide Eldon and I were taking you to visit Birchkow? I asked Dad in Bosnian. He used to be fully bilingual, but after a stroke caused by a ruptured aneurysm 10 years ago, he'd reverted back to our first language. What? Eldon asked. I was blindsiding him, but I didn't care. I got the reaction I was looking for when you turned to Dad and barked, What the hell is wrong with you? It's safe to go back there now, and I'm not so young anymore. I miss Siad, Sabuya, Rizal. Dad was listing his old gang. We're not going, I reiterated. Why not? He asked. I haven't seen my friends in 20 years. We can't, Eldon said. Then I'll go with Isad. Dad threw out in a rare moment of defiance. "You're not going without us," I snapped. My brother nodded in solidarity. Getting home from work at 10 the next night, I saw Eldon's size 14 Adidas on the mat outside my front door. Walking in, I found him on my couch, watching World Soccer Report on my TV, drinking my beer. The downside of giving him my spare key. "Got anything sweet?" He walked over to my kitchen cabinet. "Hazelnut wafers." I handed over my $5 Jadros, a Croatian import. He opened the box, took one out, put it in his mouth hole, then mumbled, "I need some milk." He went into my refrigerator and poured himself a glass. "Bosnia," I said, still stewing. "I know, is he crazy? I'm not wasting my time off in that godforsaken place. Let's enjoy string bikinis in Brazil. That's a vacation." He plopped on my couch, resting his huge feet on my glass coffee table. Taking Dad back there would be constant aggravation. It would be a catastrophe. "You're right." I was perturbed to see the glass of papaya juice he'd left next to the beer bottle. How many drinks could he have at once? "Let's tell him no way." "You tell him," Eldon said. He never liked confrontation, a trait he'd inherited from Dad. "Hey, check out Isabel, the girl I met at the bachelor party." He scrolled through his pictures of a sexy Cuban brunette from Miami, this month's fixation. "Gorgeous, nice, and a chemistry major. Why does she have to live so far away?" he asked the love gods. "Long distance is your type," I reminded him, checking her out. It was easier to discuss his current lady friend in Florida than our ancient ghost in the Balkans. "She sent me a picture of her knee to show me how swollen it is," Eldon said, showing me the pic with her index finger pointed to her leg injury. "She had an MRI, but a local doctor couldn't find anything. What do you think?" "Nice knee," I said, squinting. "If her calf tightens, it's a tear. If it buckles or locks, might need to be scoped out. Make a house call. Instead of texting, go see her." "I can't, but never close the door to any woman," he recited his motto. Or was it a rationalization for keeping a girl in every port but never one living in his home? Eldon's last serious relationship was with a gorgeous Italian woman, but it ended in disaster. He'd been faithful for 15 months, but she became too possessive, upset when he'd go to bars with me or his pals, falsely accusing him of picking up other girls. "I'm having a tough time," he admitted one night over dinner. This was the most vulnerable he'd sounded since the war. I didn't know if it was our macho culture or our proud temperaments, but nobody in my family spoke directly about our feelings. "I loved her, but I can't deal with the jealousy," Eldon continued, looking tortured. "What do I do?" He was asking me? I still wasn't over the breakup with my ex almost 2 years before. After we split, I'd tried going to clubs with my buddies. Their inane strategy was to say, "Fuck Nicole, you're better off without her. See those hot chicks around us? Take a few home with you, then you'll forget her." My father's reaction to my hurt was to walk around saying, "That's so terrible. I don't know what happened. She was so pretty and sweet and nice," over and over until I screamed, "Enough already." When I told Eldon, "I'm never giving my heart to anyone else again," I wanted him to understand my pain, guide me, say, "This happened to me before, so I know you'll feel horrible for a while, but it'll eventually fade and you'll be happy again." He said, "You'll be fine, man, you're okay," which was more annoying than helpful. Eldon finally split up with his flame. I just listened, nodded, and brought him drinks. I didn't know how to console him emotionally either. This was what we needed girlfriends for. He somehow managed to remain friendly with her, quoting Dad's advice to never leave a woman with anything bad to say about you. It occurred to me that over the years, We'd fallen for women from all backgrounds, except ours. The only Balkan female we'd ever loved was our mother, Adisa. Once we fled Bosnia, Mom swore she'd never go back. She kept that promise. She lived in Connecticut for 13 years, never leaving the United States. After we lost her to cancer in 2007, we moved Dad from Westport into his own apartment in Astoria, near both his sons. The three of us were on our own, living separately, but close by. Maybe the male Trebencheviches had remained single because we'd never finished mourning her, or because nobody could compete with Adisa's imprint. After she died, Dad reminisced about Bosnia more often. I feared seeing his motherland might be his final passion. On Saturday afternoon, Dad and Eldon came over to my place. Unlike my college buddies, who shared beer and Doritos while watching sports on TV, we played the war game, a sort of demented Jeopardy we'd invented. I put out hummus, carrots, and celery sticks and switched on my flat screen to watch the World at War series on the Military Channel. We'd seen most of these ancient videos before and found the history to be biased and one-sided, as if our people weren't worth mentioning. So Dad and Eldon would shout about the missing Bosniak version at the television. To an outsider, our brand of male bonding might look nerdily pathetic, but it gave me a chance to pick their brains for the Balkan lowdown I wasn't taught at school, in Bosnia or Connecticut. I was still trying to catch up on what had happened to us and why, as if facts from the past could solve the mystery and soothe the rejection I still felt from being thrown out of my own country. In 1914, Europe had been at peace for 40 years, began the crisp voice of the American woman narrating the World War I saga. I picked the wrong accent for that one. Black and white clips of Russian and German armies aired as she chronicled the treaties signed by the German, Italian, and Austro-Hungarian superpowers, pledging allegiance to fight together before the Great War. Started by the Serbs, Eldon called out in Bosnian. We always spoke in our mother tongue when we were together. How many other wars did they initiate? I asked, sipping coconut water. Since then, 4, Eldon answered. Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, Kosovo. It helped me to keep hearing that it wasn't just us, to put our exile in a larger geographic context. I wondered why my father, or any sane Balkanite who had a choice, would want to go back to that troubled region. I certainly didn't. I felt lucky and safe here. Most of my American friends forgot, if they ever knew, that World War I began in the Balkans. It was triggered, the narrator recited, when a Bosnian Serb nationalist assassinated the Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo in 1914. Up popped a picture of the mustachioed Ferdinand. He was the last surviving heir of Franz Josef, the Emperor of Austria-Hungary. Franz Josef was a bitter old man whose wife was killed by a Serb, said Eldon, sitting beside me on the couch. He got back at them by ordering his army to invade Serbia, added my father from his leather chair, drinking coffee. 1 million Serbs died, Eldon explained. Their military was so much smaller than the German, Turkish, and Austria armies, they seemed like the underdog. That's why the League of Nations gave Serbia the upper hand in the region after the war. My brother often recited statistics, dates, and theories off the top of his head. He was a vast storehouse of knowledge. His vast storehouse of knowledge awed me. He could have been a political science professor. The name of the country was changing to the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, the on-screen commentator reported. The language was switched to Serbo-Croato-Slovene, Thad filled in. No mention of Bosnian. Why were we erased? Serbs hated everything Turkish, so anything Islamic was hidden, Eldon said. Remember how the Serbs in Birchkow called me Turk? I slouched on the sofa, putting my feet up on the table, trying to place any memories into a historical timeline. I struggled to find a clearer sense of where we fit and why we were marginalized for so long. I felt better seeing the exclusion as part of a long-term pattern. It wasn't personal, nothing my family had done wrong. After World War I, it was hard for Muslims to become doctors or professors in Yugoslavia, Eldon told me. Serbs made up laws to steal our land and banned the name Bosniak, which we'd used since the 11th century, so tons of Muslims got the hell out. That's why 2.5 million people in Turkey have Bosnian ancestry. Yeah, when I visited Turkey, the Turks were happy to hear where I was from, Dad said. A shopkeeper there told me my grandfather was Bosnian, and he gave me a discount on tablecloth. When I took your mother to Istanbul, we were at the museum, and the tour guide was happy to find out where we lived. I nodded at the story we'd heard several times. He snuck us into a room and showed us this holy book from Bosnia that was brought over centuries before. Dad dropped off, looking out the window. Okay, let's listen. Eldon jacked up the TV volume as the TV commentator moved on to Serbian Army Commander Alexander Karadzic, who'd become king in 1929 and changed the country's name to the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. He wanted to be known as Alexander the Unifier, to curb the tribal animosities, she said. Another lesson written in Belgrade, Eldon cut in. Alexander was just another oppressive dictator. He renamed our language Yugoslavian as if that would help. We wanted to be recognized, not ignored, Dad said. When it came to our background, I knew so little. I wanted to reach my father and brother's level of understanding so I could pass it on to my own kids one day. It felt as if I'd flunked a required class. Yet no academic curriculum I'd ever encountered told the truth about our tribe. I didn't know if it was censored so much as never written. More vintage clips, maps, music, and sounds of machine gun fire followed as the documentary illustrated how, with typical Balkan volatility, that peace lasted only 5 years, until Karadzic was killed by Croatian nationalists in 1934. In retaliation for a murder by a Serbian nationalist, Eldon said. Damn, another Serb assassination, I echoed, chomping on celery. I noticed that Dad wasn't eating anything. It was getting hard for him to chew vegetables with his brittle, chipped teeth. I needed to take him to the dentist. It troubled me to see him aging. Sitting there, hunched over, he looked more fragile than I cared to admit. I yearned for my childhood image of him as a strong, swift, and immortal person. As the World War II segment, Beast of the Balkans, started, I put a plate of strawberries, blueberries, and green seedless grapes in front of him. Eldon, who often posted diet factoids on his Facebook page, preaching to his patients, if you crave sugar, eat fruit, scarfed up most of the berries himself, while Dad ate one grape slowly, like a bird. Did you drink enough water today? I asked him. He nodded. On the video, marching music dramatized the rise of Eastern European nationalism in the 1930s, swastikas denoting Nazism. A different British male voice recounted how tensions between Balkan factions worsened in World War II. In 1941, German forces bombed Belgrade. A weakened Yugoslavia signed a pact with Hitler, leading to the German occupation. The narrator described how Tito, the leader of the communist partisans, convinced most Balkanites to collaborate to defeat the Germans. Tito flashed on the screen in his general's uniform, wearing a green hat with a red star. "Hey, I remember that photo. My first grade classroom had that same picture," I jumped in. "On Republic Day, my teacher Milutin made us put our hands on our hearts and recite the oath of Yugoslavian unity. Today, when I become a pioneer, I'm going to give my pioneer word that I will love my country and spread brotherhood and unity," I recited. That was before he put a gun to my head. Dad stood up, crossed his arms. "What a fake brotherhood," he told the TV Tito. "When you were a kid, did you hate the partisans?" I asked Dad. He was just 5 years old at the start of World War II. "Why did my family have to fight for an army that didn't recognize us or our religion?" he asked, agitated. I watched as Dad shook his head and clicked his tongue. He wasn't over World War II yet. A trip to Bosnia could raise his blood pressure and give him another heart attack or another stroke. It would be insane to go. The Brit jauntily relayed how Tito's partisans prevailed and in World War II left devastation across the Balkans. He detailed how Serbs suffered 500,000 casualties, while 86,000 Muslims were killed. The long tradition of regional blood feuds ceased in 1943 when Tito became prime minister. He was seen as a popular and benevolent dictator, promoting the peaceful coexistence of Yugoslavian factions. He was elected president in 1953, around the time my mother was born. It depressed me that Tito's idealistic talk had been a lie. Our people were used. We'd never really been part of anything Yugoslavian. The hero I'd idolized as a kid turned out to be so deficient. Maybe he was too busy shoring up his power to groom a successor to ease this transition after his death. I tried. "We didn't realize it then," Eldon shrugged. "We should have known." "Guess it's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback," I conceded, thinking how Mom used to say, "Everyone is a general after the battle." "What's the quarterback expression mean?" Eldon asked. "It means woulda, coulda, shoulda," I told him. Eldon didn't go to high school in the United States, so I enjoyed filling him in on the English slang he'd missed. I recalled the first time I knew something he didn't, when Eldon came home from college, confused by Madden games. "How many downs are there?" he'd ask me. I'd never beaten him at sports. He was way taller and stronger than I was, but it was a thrill at being able to teach him American football and baseball, which we'd never played before. I didn't show off. I just told him the rules matter-of-factly, the way he used to help me. "With Tito, the economy was good. Nobody was starving," Dad was saying. "He kept the Russians out and the Serbs under control." "Yeah, until he died in 1980. Those power-mad racial supremacists were only in hibernation," Eldon shouted, pointing a carrot at the screen. "If my brother got this fired up by video clips in Queens, what would it be like in Bosnia, confronting Serbs who wanted us dead?" I didn't want to find out. I ate a handful of grapes. "So, growing up, you never noticed bias against Muslims?" I asked Dad. "A little," he told me. "For decades they argued whether Bosniaks were an ethnic group, a religion, or nationality." "Which did you want?" "Put it this way. A voting survey asked me whether I was Serb, Croat, Slovene, Yugoslav, or other," he recalled. "I picked other." In 1974, the Yugoslavian constitution was amended to list Muslims by nationality, Eldon said. "Better, but too broad." "Thanks for finally recognizing us, but a religion is not a nationality," explained Dad. Picture if the U.S. government told a Jewish person, "We're going to classify you as a Jew instead of an American in 1992. Eldon said, just like Hitler did in the 30s. Why did Tito take so long to acknowledge our existence? I wanted to know. He was surrounded by those Serb politicians, Dad said. He couldn't take a leak without their permission. All the Yugoslavian cookbooks were written in Belgrade, Eldon offered. We have to take Dad back at some point, my brother whispered as he was leaving that night. I was vaguely conscious that in some ways the war had never ended for us and we'd never really left. Some point isn't now, I told him. Since it was late and we were watching soccer the next day, my father decided to stay over, as he'd started doing a few nights a week. Later, as he slept in my spare room, I remember how he'd bought me and Eldon all the fancy sports equipment we wanted as kids. Shin guards, cleats, new sneakers, the fastest sleds. He paid for swimming lessons and drove an hour and a half to find us the best karate kimonos in the area. In the chaos of exile, when Vienna, Quebec, or Australia might have been options, my parents chose the United States for us so we'd get a good education. In America, your mom and I will start over. We will be nobodies so you and your brother can go to college and become somebodies, Dad said. Broke and exhausted in Connecticut, he remained generous, working odd jobs from 6 a.m. to 11 at night in Stratford. He'd wake up from a nap to drive me to a soccer field to time my sprints in the scorching heat. Just last week, when he'd seen me carrying heavy groceries, he took a bag out of my hands to help me carry them home. At age 71, and wound up missing his ride to a barbecue. It was selfish of me to deny him the trip home he wanted so badly. Yet it could be too stressful and perilous to return to a town where the same people who persecuted us were still in power. The complex aftermath of all the Balkan bloodshed and stories we heard put me on edge. After we fled in January 1993, the fighting intensified. Eventually Bosnians and Croatians mobilized against the Serbs, who were finally about to overtake in 1995. Unfortunately, NATO, led by the United States and Britain, intervened. It was the worst blow of our lives when Western leaders imposed the deeply flawed Dayton Accords in November 1995. The treaty unfairly ended the conflict before we could rightfully win the war we were forced into. For us, that meant we were never going home. Even President Clinton admitted this inequity. In his controversial documents and recordings published in the book The Clinton Tapes, he disclosed that during negotiation, NATO allies felt an independent Bosnia would be unnatural as the only Muslim nation in Europe. The British, French, and Russians favored the arms embargo on Bosnian Muslims precisely because it locked in Bosnia's disadvantage. France's President Mitterrand told Clinton that Bosnia did not belong among European nations, and British officials spoke of a painful but realistic restoration of Christian Europe. When Eldon read me and Dad excerpts from the book last year, our rage was mixed with vindication at the former president's confession. It's like the World War I League of Nations treaty all over again, my dad said. It's a miracle Bosnia didn't lose all our land outright. So that was why Dad always rooted against the French, British, and Russians, even at the World Cup. Muslims and Jews were never welcome in Europe, he told me. After the Dayton Treaty, some areas like Sarajevo, the largest city and cultural center of Bosnia, recovered quickly, but in Birchkow, turmoil and corruption continued to reign. Although my family wound up safe in Connecticut, we struggled financially, and for years it was too expensive and dangerous to visit our old region anyway. So we hadn't even considered going. In 1998, when my friend Yasenko's mom went to Birchkow to file papers to evict the Serbian family who'd stolen her home. American peacekeeping soldiers had to drive her to her apartment in a military jeep. She eventually won it back and sold their apartment at a devalued rate. After the war, we'd sold our two-bedroom place in Birchco, which had been worth $200,000, to Dad's friend Truly for $26,000. In 2000, international forces pressed the new local government to elect rotating multi-ethnic officials and start returning property to refugees like us. Yet, later that year, the windows of Bosniak businesses were smashed like a modern Kristallnacht, with Serbian teenagers committing the hate crimes instead of Nazis. When my grandmother visited us in Westport in 2004, she said Birchcall was still hazardous, that she'd been trying to rebuild her house and was wrangling to retrieve the pension the Serbs had tried to eradicate. "Stay where you are," Grandma Edmina warned. You have no business coming back. You're better off in America." I felt awful that in her early 70s she had to struggle to rebuild her life in Bosnia. Yet by my freshman year of college, amid a little success with grades, girls, and sports, I started seeing the upside of being an American. I realized Grandma was right. You'll live longer with better health care here," Mom told her, trying to talk her mother into moving in with us. "I'm too old for change," Grandma insisted. "I want to die where I was born." Despite the gradual return of Muslims to neighborhoods in Birchco, when my cousin Amila called, she relayed the tales of riots and ethnic clashes in her children's school in 2006. It wasn't until Dad moved to Queens the following year that he got in with a group of Balkanites who planted the idea that it was now safe to travel to our old town. Out of the 6 Bosniak guys my father palled around with in Astoria, Dad was the only one who hadn't been back to our homeland. Shemso, who owned a construction business, had spent the previous summer in Bosnia. He told Dad that all his old Birchgo buddies were asking for him, which made Dad feel lonely and left behind. "Some of your Queens gang lived in other parts of Bosnia that hadn't been occupied," I pointed out, "and your other friends escaped abroad earlier, so they never saw what we did." I was less afraid of being assaulted there than overreacting if a former neighbor asked, "What's that Bolia doing here?" Flashbacks played in my brain. I'd missed celebrating my 12th birthday because we had no food or electricity in Birchcow. Eldon joked, "No cake, bro, but plenty of candles." But I was no longer a small, starving kid. At 30, I could carry out the vengeance I couldn't then. Mom used to say, "Don't let their evil corrupt you." I didn't while she was alive, but if I was in Bosnia without her, I didn't know if I could contain my resentment. What if I went back and lost it, barging into Petra's apartment, taking back everything she'd stolen from my mother? I would wind up in jail, destroying the future we worked so hard for in New York. Eating birk in Astoria with my Bosniak neighbor Otto one morning, I said, if I saw my classmates who turned on me, things could get ugly. "Oh, all the guys who go back the first time have the same vengeful fantasies, totally normal." Otto, a Bosniak engineer, reassured me. "Really? Did anything happen when you went back?" He nodded. "At a cafe, I see this Croat neighbor who'd held a gun to my head," Edo said in Bosnian. "He said hi to me, all friendly, like everyone just took a little hiatus. I sent him over coffee and announced, 'It's on me because I have a good job. Your clothes are ripped. You don't have a dime to your name, you bum. There's 43% unemployment in Bosnia now. Too bad you created your own poverty.'" Edo said, "I I really wanted to throw a grenade under his table. Among my people in New York, the Serbs' post-war financial ruin was our victory, vindication, and proof that their bad karma was their highless, jobless rate was our favorite mantra. A week later, Dad stopped by my place, distraught that his 73-year-old Bosniak pal Osman, who he hadn't seen since 1992, had passed away. "I'm not going to be around much longer. I'm going to go down soon." "Go down where?" I asked Dad. I was tired from working late. "I'll die." "You're not dying. The state's prolonged your life by 20 years. You'll outlive them all," I told him. But I didn't entirely believe my own cheerful prediction. He'd recovered from his stroke, but a ruptured Achilles tendon slowed his gait, and his left knee was worn down. He had a limp. "The way Dad's ankle and knee are doing, he might not be walking so well 5 years down the road," I told Eldon that night. "It would be too hard for him to get around." "Don't pressure me," he said. I felt pressured myself. The next day, Aunt Basira, my mom's sister, called from Bosnia, crying about how much she missed us. "Will I live long enough to see all of you?" "I'm not ready," I told her. "I feel bad we haven't seen Basira," Eldon said, guilting me too. He'd always been the closest to our only aunt, who reminded him of Mom. "So, will you guys be in Bosnia this summer?" asked the owner of Black Bull the next time we went there. She was also from Birchcall, but she imported food they sold from our old town. Dad was telling his whole damn crew about this trip I didn't want to make. "We don't know. We're deciding when," Eldon said. "What? We were?" We'd switched roles as usual. I was surprised he'd give up a South American beach for Bosnia. "You guys would be doing a great deed if you took her that," she said. It was a conspiracy. Despite my good arguments, the world was pushing me to face down our past. That night I invited Dad over for a Chilean sea bass and couscous, cooking him a healthy dinner, as I did a few times a week. He showed me a picture of his post-college jazz ensemble and said, "I miss my old buddies." Then he upped the stakes. "I really need to see my father's grave one more time." He admitted that he was afraid he'd die before seeing his home and making peace with the country that double-crossed him. Talk about a guilt trip. I realized he wouldn't be with me forever, and worried how terrible I'd feel if we'd had to go to Grandpa's cemetery in Bosnia without him, knowing we'd denied my father his last request. Having breakfast at an Astoria restaurant we liked, the Old Bridge, I told Eldon, "We need to go and get this over with." My brother had always been more malleable than me. I was known as the stubborn one, so once I changed my mind, there was no question. We were going. If we wait, Dad might not be able to walk as well. I argued. We should do it now because the timing is right, I reasoned. "I'll only go out of spite," Eldon said, "to show the Serbs we have the balls to return. I'll spread the message. I survived. I'm healthy, strong, with a good career. Look at you losers. You're out of work, drink beer and smoke all day. You can't even afford to take a lady out to dinner. You tried to get rid of us, stole everything we had, put me and Dad in your camp like animals, and now you're stuck in the hole you created." I patted Eldon's back, wishing I'd let him talk me into sunny, carefree Brazil. After he left, I managed going back to our old apartment, where my teammates Velibor and Dalibor would run up to greet me. Like we were all best friends, I would smile and hug them, playing along with the charade. I'd invite them to Aunt Basira's for a barbecue in the suburbs. There, I'd get those fickle, weak fuckers drunk on pear moonshine. I'd suggest a walk on the cornfields outside her fence, where it would be easy to cover up a crime. I'd surprise them, pull out a bat and shatter their kneecaps in soldiers, so every time they had joint pain, they'd regret what they'd done to me. Darkness brought out my wrath, but in daylight, Eldon and I discussed rational reasons to go now, quieting each other's anxiety. Birchko's half Muslim again, so there's a better balance of power with city officials and police, he texted. Yeah, the current climate makes it safer to return, I texted back. And we could both get time off in July. Aunt Basira insisted that we stay with her so there would be no hotel fee. At $13.50 a ticket, we could afford the airfare, I told him. We'd split the cost of our retired father's seat as a birthday and Father's Day gift. Good, but I'll stay with Sid, Dad said, surprising us by announcing he'd lodged with his bandmate from the 50s. Dad was the drummer, Syed on alto sax. What? That's not fair, I cut him off. We're only going for you. We're staying at Aunt Basira's. I fought for my mother's only sister, whom we hadn't seen since we'd left, though she'd surely drive us all crazy with her overabundance of food, tears, and pets. Basira's family, Eldon backed me up. You can see Syed every day. You can stay with Basira. I'll stay with Syed, my father insisted. You're making us go. We're doing it for you, I yelled at Dad. So at least stop being so self-involved and stay where Mom would want us to. Usually I was quiet and agreeable with him, but all this talk of Bosnia was freaking me out. The worst weeks of my life were when Dad and Eldon were taken to Luka concentration camp. Every day I feared they were dead. Why are you raising your voice? Can't we have a discussion like two grown gentlemen? My father sounded hurt. He was Mr. Chill until you disagreed with him. You're killing a dead bird, I added, mixing up American sayings about birds and horses. We're staying with Basira, Eldon insisted. Okay, he acquiesced. Later that night, I told Eldon, remember my classmate, Igor, that douche who trapped me on the stairs at Birchcow and called me Balija? If I see him, I'm shattering a beer bottle on his face. Every time he looks in the mirror, he'll see the scar and think of me. That's why I'm not leaving your side, he told me. I'll be your shadow, like the Secret Service. I can't guarantee anything, I told him, but let's make sure Dad doesn't get mad at a Serb neighbor who shakes his hand, pretending nothing happened. Why do we have to go again? Eldon asked. For Dad, I said. When I told my work buddies I was going to Bosnia for a week, they thought it would be a cool trip, like sightseeing in Paris or Barcelona. Americans of my generation had no idea of the complex, volatile ethnic layers that made up Yugoslavia, a land still divided by medieval cultural hatreds. I couldn't explain that I wasn't just traveling to Eastern Europe for fun. I was re-entering the hotbed of chronic religious unrest that haunted my past. In the censored, Serbian-created version of Balkan history I was taught at school in Birchkow, the Serbs portrayed themselves as defenders of the peace or innocent victims. During 1992, power-hungry politicians had played the old world distortion that we were aggressors like the ancient Turks or modern militant Islamicists, using that illusion to justify ethnocide. Unfortunately, old prejudices spilled over to our new country. After 9/11, a Connecticut neighbor asked my mom, "What do you think about Osama bin Laden?" My mother said, "He's an evil, horrible man, but not terrorist." Offended that anyone would connect us to violence or terrorism or suicide bombers. I'd never seen anyone wear a hijab until I moved to Queens. Once I made the decision that I could handle returning to Bosnia, my next hurdle was figuring out which of the 3 Balkan airports we should fly into. Each had its own upside as well as headache, either logistic or historical. I suggested landing in Belgrade, Serbia. That was fastest. We could get to Birchkow in an hour. My brother refused. "I'm not scared of those genociders in Belgrade," he said, his voice firing up, "but I'm not listening to Serb accents on the plane, going through their passport control, returning to the border where they degraded us at gunpoint. I'm not giving them $1 of my business by buying airfare." Belgrade was out. Dad wanted Sarajevo, Bosnia. To get to Birchkow from there, we'd have to drive 4 hours through winding mountains with no Serb border patrol. But I nixed that route since it wouldn't take us across the Sava Bridge. I had a special reason to venture that way. Dad and I used to fish along the Sava's bank, watching boat regattas and picnics there in peacetime. The bridge was blown up on April 30th, 1992, killing hundreds of our civilian countrymen who were walking across it. After rigging the underlying beams with dynamite, the Serbs opened the bridge at 5 a.m. and lured our refugees into the ambush. They were killed 1 kilometer, less than a mile, from freedom. After a series of bridges were similarly detonated, there was no easy way to get from Croatia to Bosnia. It would have led us to liberty. It was rebuilt by U.S. soldiers in 1996. That was the only way I wanted to re-enter my former country, symbolically saying, "You tried to destroy us, but we're back, marching down the steel pathway you blew up." We finally compromised on the third choice, Zagreb, Croatia. So we landed in a country where we'd never lived, and thus nobody harbored any bad associations. Then we'd drive 3 hours on the highway along the river Sava so I could cross my boyhood bridge. We'd stay on the Croatian side, so the border guard would likely be from there. Croatians had been fellow victims of Serbs and our allies. That is, except for a treacherous stretch in 1993 when the Southern Croats made a pact with Milosevic to carve out Bosnia. They lost to Muslims, but after the 1994 Washington Agreement, another compromise urged by the Americans, our 2 republics joined forces again, and there had been friendly ever since. There was also the peculiar matter of our passports. We kept the ones issued from Yugoslavia. The only problem? That country no longer existed, so they were of use only as souvenirs. We would have loved to get Bosnian passports in 1992, and our last year there after Bosnians declared independence from Yugoslavia and became their own nation. They would have pictured our old flag, a blue coat of arms adorned with a white stripe and 6 fleur-de-lis. But official documents were impossible to obtain during the Serb occupation of our town. Eldon and I obtained regular U.S. passports when we became American citizens in 2001. Dad, who couldn't pass the English test due to his brain injury, needed a doctor's note to be granted special dispensation for his U.S. citizenship. Mom, too sick to care, died in 2007 with just a U.S. permanent resident card that stated her country of origin. So Americans officially accepted her nationality as a Bosnian, while she was exiled from the country that bore and betrayed her. Eldon and I had been offered dual citizenship with America and Bosnia, but we refused. We hated that the current passports from our original land had added Serbian Cyrillic script and no longer displayed our flag. The new one was blue and yellow, divided diagonally by a white stripe of stars. It resembled the European Union flag, representing nobody, managing to simultaneously offend all of the still antagonistic ex-Yugoslavian factions. So we'd never become official Bosnians again. We'd be Yanks flying into Croatia on Lusana Airlines with a brief stop in Frankfurt. Germans make more efficient machines anyway, Dad said. If we get into trouble with the Serb officer in Birchkow, we'll call the 800 number for American Embassy that's on our passports, I'd told Eldon, feeling protected by my U.S. identity. Good. Americans take care of their own, Eldon agreed. Right after I made the reservations, we started to plan our itinerary, or at least discuss what our mission would be. My father's goal was to reconnect with his old buddies, so I pulled out Mom's old photo albums in the closet and went over to them with Dad. He couldn't use a computer, so I scanned the old pictures for him, Googled Bosnian names, and looked up people on Facebook who was still alive and living there. We found several email addresses that I used to update contact info. Then Dad phoned his comrades. He first called his former sports club colleague, Truly, who'd changed his name from Sifudin when he moved to Germany. In 2006, Truly purchased our old Birchkow apartment from us for only $26,000 since it was devalued by the war. He used it as a summer home and said we were welcome any time. Truly promised to meet us there in July. When I asked, he confirmed that our Serb neighbor, Petra, remained next door. She was the only other person we knew who was still living in the building. The thought of seeing her there made me wince. Yet I anxiously anticipated her reaction. I pictured how nervous she'd be when I surprised her by showing up at her doorstep, all grown up and towering over her. In the weeks before we left, I tried to focus on my job, but it wasn't easy. "Hi, Zach, how's the heel?" I asked my noon client, a blonde 17-year-old high school athlete with the surfer mentality, barely affected by his Achilles tendonitis. "Hey, dude, you gonna clear me for football camp?" he asked. "Lots of scouts." "You call yourself a linebacker and you can't even squat?" I teased. My cell phone word. "Check out what that sick fuck racist Dodik just said." Eldon emailed me in our first language. Now he's claiming the 1995 Srebrenica massacre of Muslim men and boys never happened, that Bosniaks dug up the bodies of other graves as a ruse. Eldon had been sending me links all day from www.24sada.info about the Bosnian Serb President Dodik. He's sprinkling idiocy over their minds. Let's start with juking drills," I told Zach, walking him over to the carpeted area. I pulled out an agility ladder. Zach began stepping in and out of it. My cell went off again. "Those psychotic possums have been living their dream of greater Serbia for centuries, and every year they have less. It's going to be 50% unemployment soon." "Hope that's a hot babe," Zach noticed my distraction. "I wish, man. It's just my brother," I said. "Bend your knees. Lower." Eating a chicken sandwich in the back room at work that day, I recalled the list we'd seen in Perro's hand in the Bosniak families the unit was evacuating in 1992. I thought of the Serb death list I'd heard that my friend Yasenko's parents were on because they'd voted for a Muslim party. Then I remembered that in the movie Schindler's List, the hero Schindler, played by Liam Neeson, wrote down names of Jews who would work at his factory and survive. Now it was my turn to record my own foreign war-related agenda. While Dad collected phone numbers of his old pals, and Eldon was scouring Bosnian newspapers, maps showing current ethnic breakdowns of towns, and political blogs, I developed a different obsession. I took out a pen, tore off a sheet of notebook paper, and wrote the Bosnia list. Instead of the history museums, medieval castles, and waterfalls the Balkans were known for, I scrawled down the names of Serb classmates and friends who had turned on us. I'd track them down to ask them what changed overnight. My good memories of Birchcow were ruined by thoughts of how defenseless I had felt as our next-door neighbor humiliated my mother daily. So number 1 was, confront Petra. Number 2, stand at Perro's grave. No, I crossed that out and wrote, piss on Perro's grave. Then I changed it back again. Since Dad insisted on seeing his dead friends' relatives, number 3 became visit Muslim cemeteries. I amended it to read, visit the Muslim cemetery to honor my dad's fallen comrades. What was next? Maybe I'd locate Dalibor and Velibor and look them in the eye and ask, how could you invite me to your home for your birthday party, then kick me out and spit in my face a week later? Would you have let your dad shoot me in the back? I considered, tracked down my old karate Serb room teammates. Then I decided I was more interested in getting our Serb neighbor Milos to admit he regretted fighting against us. I put my list in my shirt pocket, but wound up pulling it out often, in between the dozen clients I treated that day, as well as on the subway home and when I ate dinner alone that night. I switched the order, crossed it out, then revised. Later, in the shower, I thought of the mass murders from Luka and ran out, dripping wet, to jot that down. Find out where Renko is imprisoned. Over the course of 3 months, finishing my list took me over. The closer we got to taking our trip, the more raw emotions I unearthed and felt desperate need to resolve. We have 7 days. Let's figure out all of our priorities, I told Eldon over 4th of July weekend, as we ate zelionica at Yuku's, a Montenegrin-owned diner in our neighborhood. Dad wants to meet up with Truly and Sead and his jazz buddies and sports colleagues. Of course, we'll see Basira and Amila and cousins, Eldon said. I want to visit the army cemetery and the statue for Bosnian war heroes in Birchkow. While he focused on statues and stones, my father longed to reunite with Muslim friends and relatives. I obsessed over the Serbs I wanted vengeance on, both living and dead. I can't wait to find Petra, the sadistic bitch, I admitted to Eldon, showing him my list. She's the first one you want to see? Really? Eldon looked confused. Why? He'd been a tall 18-year-old during the war, more in danger of getting killed than I was, so he'd spent most of 1992 hiding indoors with Dad. While they survived 2 weeks in the camp, most of their stress came from anticipation and claustrophobia. I was the little shrimp outside on the stairwell who every day was picked on by former friends, spit at, denied food in stores, hit, tripped on the steps, and shot at. My suffering wasn't interactive. With so much face time on the street with Serbs, the confrontations I craved now were more personal. The list was becoming my scheduling book, security blanket, preparation tool, medicine to stem the pain, and symbol of my control. We had 7 days in Bosnia. I might never go back. I didn't want to be left with eternal regrets. Meanwhile, I couldn't stop reliving all those times I'd walked through our building with Mom, watching the pain on her face as Petra toyed with her. You won't be needing that carpet, Petra had said before taking the black and white rug my mother had treasured. I was haunted by not being able to protect Mom. When I was 12, I couldn't even argue. I was muffled then, since Petra could have had turned us into the police. Petra loomed large in my Bosnian war memories. She was the first neighbor who'd turned on us. Right next door, she was the closest corrosive force through the dismal year. On our first 5 tries to get out of the country, we were forced back from the checkpoint. Each time, Petra waited at the building's entrance, smirking when Mom told her guards had refused to let us go. My tight-knit family of 4 was finally able to flee Bosnia together. When we returned now, Petra would expect to see my mom too. Would I tell her that she had died? No, I would bang on Petra's door to demand she give back my mom's clothes along with her carpet. I'd finally retrieve my mother's stolen belongings, bring her belated justice. It would be so bizarre for her trio of Trebenchevik men to return without her. Yet, despite my mother's heartbreak over what our country did to us, she'd be pleased with the reason we were going back. I could still hear her voice at the end saying, "When I'm gone, make sure you boys take care of Dad." She didn't have to ask. I would never put him in a nursing home or hospice, no matter what. He was my blood. During the war, as we started over in a new country, where we knew nobody, the 4 of us were our own team. We were all we had. I would take care of Dad forever, just as he'd taken care of me. At 5 p.m. on Friday, July 15th, 2011, we met up on my Queen Street corner to hail a cab to the airport. I looked like a typical American guy in my loose-fitting black jeans, a yellow t-shirt, and suede diesel sneakers. Eldon wore Adidas and cargo shorts with lots of pockets. My father was wearing his best navy suit and a tie. "Way to be comfortable, Dad," Eldon said. "You'll melt in the heat when we land." "Your grandfather always dressed like a gentleman," Dad said. It was as if he was boarding the airplane in first class instead of being stuffed in the middle of the back row of cheap seats in coach, but I felt powerful, able to grant my father this crucial wish. It touched me how excited he was to go home. And that is the end of that chapter. Thank you, and please subscribe and like.